The ring hit the table before she did. Detective Seo Yuna didn't look up immediately. She had seen enough confessionals to know that rushing a man's silence only made him lie faster. So she waited, her pen resting against the open folder, while the fluorescent light above them buzzed and Jaiho Kwon sat across from her with the eyes of someone who had not slept in days and was not entirely sure he wanted to. She laid the first photograph on the table, then the second, then the third. 3 women, 3 different countries. 3 cases with the same detail she had circled in red ink on every file. Ring found at the scene, no luggage taken, no contact made since. She looked at him finally. "Tell me," she said quietly, "do you know what all 3 have in common?" Jaiho stared at the photographs. Something moved across his face that was not grief exactly, but was close enough to it that she felt the shift in the room. His jaw tightened. His hands, flat on the table, curled very slightly. "They all loved me," he whispered. Silence. 3 days earlier, Jaiho had come home to a stillness that had a shape to it. Not the normal quiet of an empty apartment, but the kind of quiet that means something has been removed from the air. He stepped through the doorway at 3:30 in the morning, still in his coat, and the first thing he registered was the tea. Amara's tea, half drunk on the kitchen counter, still faintly warm. His eyes moved to the ring beside it. "Amara." His voice came out wrong. Too flat, too controlled, in the way that voices go controlled right before they break. He moved through the apartment the way a man moves when he is trying not to run into the bedroom, the bathroom, back to the kitchen, then to the study where she sometimes sat at midnight writing long emails home to Lagos when she thought he was asleep. "Amara." Every room answered him the same way. He stood in the hallway for a long moment with his hand against the wall, and the worst part, the thing that undid him completely, was that he recognized the feeling. He had been here before. The same silence. The same quality of absence that was not absence but removal, precise and deliberate, as if someone had come in and taken a thing he had not known was borrowed. He picked up the ring. He had given it to her in the garden of his aunt's house in Busan on a Tuesday evening in October, when the light was falling gold and she had been laughing at something he'd said, her head tipped back, and he'd thought, This is what I have been going toward my whole life." He sat on the kitchen floor. He did not call anyone. He did not cry. He just held the ring in his palm and breathed in the last of the warmth from her tea and waited for morning to come. At the police station, Detective Seo Yuna let him talk. She had a way of listening that made people say more than they intended to. She sat very still, she wrote very slowly, and she asked no question that could be answered with a single word. Jaiho spoke for 40 minutes without stopping. He told her about the pregnancy, about Minyi, about the car ride home from the clinic where Amara had sat beside him looking out the window without speaking for the entire 40-minute drive. Not crying, just very still in the way of a person who has just understood something and is deciding what to do with the understanding. He told her about the weeks after, how Amara had grown quieter in small increments, like a dial being turned down so gradually you only noticed when the room was almost dark. How he had tried and tried and tried, and how he had told himself it was grief, just grief, that she would come back to him once the grief had somewhere to go. She left without a bag, he said, without her phone charger, without her shoes. Seo's pen slowed. She kept her face still, kept her hand moving on the page, but something had locked behind her eyes that Jaiho did not notice. He was looking at his hands. She had heard that phrase before. Not those exact words, but close enough that the hairs on her arms had gone up. "Mr. Kwon," she said, setting down her pen, "how long were you and Amara married?" 3 years. "And before Amara," she kept her voice even, "have you been in a serious relationship before?" He nodded. "Park Soo-yeon, we were engaged." She opened her desk drawer and removed a second folder. Jaiho went very still when she placed the file on the table. The photograph staring back at him was 6 years old. A woman in a yellow coat outside a Han River cafe. Soo-yeon, before she disappeared. "She left her ring," Seo said, No luggage, no phone charger. She paused. No shoes. The air in the room changed. Jaiho's mouth opened. He looked up at Seo and she watched something crumble behind his eyes. Not guilt, but the far more terrible thing. Comprehension. How? Mr. Kwon. Seo opened the third folder slowly. I need to ask you about your mother. The photograph was black and white. 1997. A woman with Jaiho's jaw and Jaiho's eyes and a silk dress that suggested a formal occasion she never made it to. Jaiho looked at the photograph of his mother for a long time without speaking. This was not a love story. This was a pattern. He drove to Incheon alone. His grandfather's house smelled of old lacquer and something older, dried herbs, maybe, or incense, burned so long ago it had soaked into the walls. Jaiho had not been here in 7 years. The old man had died when Jaiho was 26, leaving him the house, the savings, and a carved wooden ring box that Jaiho had used for every ring he had ever given, without ever asking where the box came from. He stood in the hallway for a moment, then went to the study. The locked drawer. He had always assumed it held documents, legal things, old letters, the ordinary archives of a man's life. He had never asked for the key because he had never needed it, and because, if he was honest with himself, and standing in that cold room he was being deeply honest with himself, some part of him had never wanted to know. He broke the lock. Inside was a wooden case. Inside the case were photographs. His grandfather stood with a group of Hausa men in what looked like Lagos, 1974. The heat was visible in the photograph somehow. The men's shirts were untucked. The light was white and harsh. His grandfather was younger than Jaiho had ever seen him, younger and smiling and holding something in both hands. A ring box, identical to the one on Jaiho's shelf at home. Jaiho sat on the floor of his grandfather's study with the photograph in his hands, and for the first time in 3 days, he understood that what was happening was not something he could explain. Not a coincidence, not a pattern of bad luck, not even a curse in the way the word was used in ordinary language. Something had been done, deliberately, by someone he had loved and trusted. And 3 women were gone because of it. In a small room in Lagos, Amara sat across from a man she had never met, trying to decide if she was more afraid of him or of the alternative. Barrister Chaik was not what she had expected a man who knew about blood debt contracts to look like. He wore reading glasses on a beaded chain. He had a thermos of tea. He looked like someone's uncle, which Amara supposed was the whole point. She had removed Jaiho's ring on the morning of the 3rd day. She had not known she was doing anything significant. She had stood at the kitchen sink and looked at her bare hands and thought, I cannot wear this and also decide to leave. One of those things has to come first. So she'd set the ring on the counter beside her half-drunk tea and walked out of the apartment without her shoes, which she had also not consciously planned, but which in retrospect she understood had been her body, understanding something her mind was still catching up to. She had been on the bus to the airport when a message appeared on her phone from a number she did not recognize. It said only, "Do not board the plane. Someone will meet you outside gate 4. She had almost not stopped. She had almost kept walking, chalking it up to spam or some elaborate scam, right up until she had stepped off the bus, and there was a man in reading glasses and a beaded chain who said her name with the correct pronunciation on the first try and said, "You have no idea how close you just came." That was 3 days ago. Now she sat in this room in Lagos while Chaik explained things that should not have been real, except that 2 other women were missing and she was not, and that distinction felt like the most significant fact of her life. You removed the ring before the 72-hour window, Chaik said. That is why you are here and not somewhere else. Somewhere else, Amara repeated. Where? Chaik was quiet for a moment. Suyeon and Jaiho's mother did not remove their rings in time. They were reclaimed. The contract uses the word reclaimed. They are conscious. They are intact. But they are held in a place that does not exist on any map I can show you. Amara stared at him. Her hands were flat on the table. She could feel the place where Jaiho's ring was supposed to be, the faint indentation on her finger, the ghost of the weight of it. Jae-ho doesn't know, she said. It was not a question. He did not know, Chaik said. He may know something now. She stood up. Then I need to go back, I need to. If you go back before the contract breaks, Chaik said quietly, you complete it yourself. Your return, your presence, while the bond is still active, will trigger the final clause. He looked at her over his reading glasses. You will not come back from that, Amara. She stood there with her chair pushed back and her hands at her sides, and she thought about Jae-ho calling her name through the apartment at 3 a.m. She knew he would have done that. She knew exactly how he would have sounded. She had heard that quality in his voice once before, when she'd been late coming back from a run, and he'd been standing in the doorway with his phone in his hand. The relief on his face when he saw her so enormous and so unguarded that she'd had to look away. She sat back down. Tell me, she said, what happens to the women who are taken? What happened to them was this. Soo-yeon moved through a marketplace that existed somewhere between waking and dreaming, buying fish in a language she had not known before she arrived there and could not recall learning, the stalls stretching in every direction, the sky above her the color of old brass. She was aware. That was the worst of it. Fully, continuously aware, in the way of someone in a long fever who knows they are feverish but cannot locate the exit. She had been aware for 6 years. She thought about Jae-ho sometimes. She did not blame him. That was the specific cruelty of it. She could feel, even in that place, that he had not known, that his love had been real, and the love being real made the trap more perfect, not less. Jae-ho's mother, Ha-yoon, sat by a window in a courtyard in a city that might have been Kano but was not quite Kano, watching a sea that faced the wrong direction. She had been watching it since 1997. She had been 31 years old when it started. She did not know how old she was now. She had counted seasons for a while, then stopped. Her son would be 34. She worked that out occasionally in the quiet hours. 34. Older now than she had been when she was taken. She wondered if he looked like his father. She wondered if he was happy. She had not known, when she put the ring on, that her husband's family had made arrangements, that the love she felt was housed inside a mechanism. She could not call out. But she had never stopped listening for his name. Chaik called Jae-ho at 9 a.m. Jae-ho was still in his grandfather's study. He had not moved from the floor. My name is Barrister Emeka Chaik, the voice said. I have been trying to find you for 3 years. I know about the ring, I know about your grandfather, and I know where your mother is. Jae-ho's hand tightened on the phone. His whole body went rigid. I have Amara with me, Chaik continued. She is safe. She did something right without knowing it was right. She has time. But I need you to listen to me very carefully, because what I am about to tell you is going to be very difficult to believe, and I don't have the luxury of giving you time to argue about it. He told him everything. Jae-ho sat on the floor of his grandfather's house with the phone against his ear and listened. He did not interrupt. He did not push back. Part of him, a very deep and exhausted part that had been living for 3 days in the specific purgatory of not understanding, felt something loosen at the edges, not relief, but the terrible, clarifying sensation of a truth that is worse than the lies it replaces finally landing. When Chaik finished, the line was silent for a long time. I didn't know, Jae-ho said. His voice cracked once and then steadied. I didn't know any of it. I know you didn't, Chaik paused. That is why the women you loved are still recoverable. The contract requires complicity or innocence. You were innocent. That left a door. What door? You destroy the ring. The original ring, the one in that house in the carved box. You renounce your claim to your grandfather's fortune publicly. You break the line of inheritance. The contract dissolves. The women come back. Jae-ho looked at the photograph in his hand. His grandfather, smiling, in 1974, holding the box that had destroyed 3 lives. And if I don't? Jae-ho asked. The silence on the other end of the phone was answer enough. And Amara, Jae-ho said, she's safe right now. She is safe right now. She can hear me if I call her. A pause. Yes, but I need you to understand something, Jae-ho. It was the first time Chaik had used his name without the title. If you go to her before the contract is broken, you complete the cycle. The bond between you is still active. Your presence around her activates the final clause. She is not reclaimed yet, but she would be if you went to her. Jae-ho pressed his hand against his eyes. So I choose, he said quietly. I go find her everything I want and lose her, or I stand still and trust a man I have never met. Yes, Chaik said, that is what you choose. Detective Seo Yuna drove to Incheon and found him still sitting on the floor. She did not comment on this. She looked around the study, at the open drawer and the photographs and the ring box, and she crouched beside him and read what she could read. Chaik called you, she said. He looked up. How do you know about Chaik? Because I've been working this case for 6 years, she said. And he called me 2 years ago, and I thought he was a fraud. And then I opened your grandfather's file and started cross-referencing the Nigerian construction contracts from 1974, and I stopped thinking he was a fraud. She sat on the floor next to him. I've been waiting for you to come here and open this drawer. You knew. I knew there was something in that drawer. I knew you'd come here when it got bad enough. She looked at the photograph. I didn't know it would be this, exactly this, but... She was quiet a moment. 6 years is a long time to work a case. You develop a feeling for the shape of things. Jae-ho turned the ring box over in his hands. If you were me, he said, would you trust him? Would you stand still and trust a man you've never met over every instinct you have? Amara is alive. She's in Lagos right now. I could get on a flight. I could be there in 7 hours. Seo looked at the photographs for a long time. She did not answer. She did not answer because the honest answer was that she did not know, and she respected him too much to lie about it, and she respected herself too much to tell a person who was being asked to surrender the most fundamental human instinct. Go to the person you love, go now, don't wait, that it was simple. It was not simple. She sat on the floor of his grandfather's study, in silence, while Jae-ho made the only choice that could save anyone. He stood up. He picked up the ring box. He said, let's go to the harbor. Incheon Harbor at dawn. The water was the color of pewter, flat and cold, the city still mostly dark behind them. Gulls somewhere. A cargo ship moving slowly across the far edge of the world. Jae-ho stood at the railing with the ring in his palm, the gold bright and ordinary looking in the early light, and Seo stood behind him, and Chaik was on the phone, and somewhere in Lagos, Amara was sitting in a small room with her bare hand on the table, waiting. Jae-ho had not slept. His coat was the same one he'd worn when he came home to her half-drunk tea. He had not thought to change it. He looked at the ring for a long time. He thought about his grandfather, a man who had wanted more than he was allowed, and had found someone willing to help him take it. That was what his mother would tell him later, in the kitchen in Kano, pouring tea with hands that trembled only slightly. He had not been a monster. He had been a man who made a bargain and decided that the cost would be paid by the people who came after him, because the people who came after him were abstract and the thing he wanted was immediate and real. Jae-ho had loved 3 women. He had proposed 3 times. He had chosen the carved wooden box each time because it had been his grandfather's and it was beautiful and it felt like continuity, like family, like love that went further back than yourself. He understood now what continuity it had actually been. My grandfather built this family, he said quietly to the water, on a debt paid in women. He opened his hand. The ring fell. The water took it without drama, without ceremony, just the small sound of a thing entering a place it would not come back from. The surface closed over it. The gulls called. The cargo ship kept moving. Chaik said something on the phone that Jae-ho did not process because the world had gone very strange at the edges. A vibration in the air that was not sound exactly, that he felt behind his teeth and in the backs of his hands, and Seo made a sharp sound behind him. And then everything went still. In a marketplace that did not exist on any map, Soo-yeon stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the stall with a fish in each hand and felt the quality of the air change. The brass-colored sky shifted. The sounds of the market, the calls in the language she had not known before she arrived, dimmed, and then fell away entirely. She looked up. The sky was wrong, and then it was not wrong anymore. She folded to the ground in a sole alley she had not seen in 6 years, gasping, the fish gone, her hands empty and cold on the concrete, the right sky enormous and gray above her, and she started crying before she had fully understood that she was back. In a courtyard in Kano, Ha-yoon stood up from her chair by the window. The sea that had faced the wrong direction was not there anymore. There was a wall, a courtyard she recognized, a place she had been decades before on a trip with her husband. Her phone was on the ground at her feet, which made no sense. She picked it up. The screen lit. A number she did not recognize began to ring. She answered it. "Iyama," Jaiho said, from a harbor in Incheon, weeping without self-consciousness for the first time in years. "Iyama, I'm here." In Lagos, Amara walked out of a small room and into daylight. The sun hit her face and she stood still for a moment, blinking, feeling the weight of what she had just come back from, not a place, not exactly, but a possibility, a version of herself that had almost been swallowed whole. She looked down at her bare hand. Chaik was watching from the doorway. He said nothing. He understood that there was nothing to say at this particular moment, and he had enough wisdom to let the moment be what it was. Amara looked up at the sky for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and booked a flight. Incheon Airport, Gate 12, 3 weeks later. Jaiho was there before she landed. He had been there 2 hours before her flight touched down, which he was not proud of, but he had not been able to help it. He had stood in the arrivals hall with his hands in his pockets, watching the doors, and when they opened, he had felt his heart do something inconvenient and persistent. She came through the doors in a blue coat he had never seen before, carrying a bag that was very much not the bag he had bought her for their 2nd anniversary, and she looked exactly like herself. Which was the thing about Amara that had always undone him. She always looked so completely, uncompromisingly like herself, that the world had to rearrange itself around her rather than the other way around. He did not move toward her. This was intentional. He had decided, on the drive to the airport, that he would not move toward her. That it had to be a choice she made first, freely, with full knowledge of what choosing him had already cost her. She stopped when she saw him. People flowed around them, the ordinary river of arrivals and reunions and departures, and they stood in the middle of it and looked at each other. He did not reach for her hand. She did not move toward him immediately. The silence between them was not the silence of the apartment at 3 in the morning, the terrible silence of a thing removed. It was a different kind, full rather than empty. A silence that was being held carefully by both of them, turned over, examined. "I didn't come looking for you," he said. His voice was steady. He had practiced saying it steadily. Not because he wanted it to sound controlled, but because he wanted her to understand that he was saying it from the choice, not from the wound. She looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. A beat. Something moved across her face that was not quite a smile, but held the shape of one, the way a room holds the shape of the light that was just in it. "That's the first time," she said quietly, "that you've ever chosen me correctly." He felt that land in his chest the way she had always landed, precisely, without warning, in the exact place that left no room to recover quickly. It was not a happy ending. There was too much damage in the architecture for it to be that. There was a mother who had lost 27 years to a window facing the wrong sea. There was a woman in Seoul who had come back to a city that had continued without her. There was a question that Jaiho would spend a long time answering about what it meant to have benefited, unknowingly, from a foundation built on someone else's suffering. There was the matter of what came next between them, whether the love that remained was enough to build something new on, or whether it was simply the last warmth of something that had already ended, confused for a beginning. It was not a happy ending, but it was a true one. Some weeks later, Jaiho sat across a table from his mother for the first time in 27 years. She poured tea. He watched her hands. They were his hands. He had always been told he had his mother's hands, but he had not understood what that meant until now, seeing the long fingers and the particular way she wrapped them around a cup, exactly the way he did. a gesture so familiar from the inside that seeing it from the outside felt like watching himself in a mirror. Neither of them spoke for a long time. There was too much to say, and they were both people who understood that some things, said too quickly, become the wrong version of themselves. So they sat with the tea and the kitchen sounds and the ordinary miracle of being in the same room. "Your grandfather," Ha-yoon said finally, in her Hausa-accented Korean, the accent that had deepened in the years she had been away, "was not a monster." Jae-ho looked up. "He was a man who wanted more than he was allowed," she said, "and found someone willing to help him take it." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "He did not think of it as a cost. He thought of it as an arrangement, something in the future that would handle itself." She paused. "That is how people do these things, Jae-ho. They arrange for the cost to be paid later by people they haven't met yet, and they call that planning." Jae-ho looked at his empty hands. He thought about the ring box, about the proposals, about the 3 times he had knelt with something that felt like love and was love, genuinely and completely love, inside a mechanism he had never thought to examine. He thought about the lingering question, the one he would never fully answer, that would sit in him the way an old fracture sits in a bone, not painful exactly, but always present. Can a man be innocent of a curse he inherited but never questioned? Is love enough if it is housed inside a structure that destroys the person you love? And if you benefit from a thing without knowing it, if you are warm from a fire you didn't light and didn't know was burning people to fuel it, does your ignorance absolve you? He did not know. He was not sure the question was the kind that answered. His mother refilled his cup without asking if he wanted more, which was such a specific and ordinary intimacy that he had to look at the window for a moment. Outside, the sky was the right color. If this story got into you, if you are sitting with that question right now, turning it over, drop it in the comments. What do you think? Is Jae-ho innocent? Can he be? Does love without knowledge of the cost count as love or as something else? This is the kind of story that deserves to be argued about. So argue. Like this video if Jae-ho's choice at the harbor hit you the way it hit me writing it. Subscribe because we are going to keep making stories that leave you like this, not resolved, not wrapped up, but alive in you for days. You deserve stories that do that to you. We will keep delivering them. See you in the next one.